Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for some more people to join in. So if you just bear with us for a couple of more minutes. Thank you. Those of you who've just joined, it's just to again let you know that we're going to wait for a couple minutes and then we'll start off. I think we'll give it one more minute and then we can start it off. So we're just about 2 minutes past 12. It's 3 minutes past 12. So I think we should be ready to start. Jake, are you okay in removing the background so it goes into the spotlight or?
All good. Thank you, Ava.
That's great. Are we in the spotlight mode? Because I can't see it.
Yeah,
That's
you and
that's
Anthony are
good.
really on Spotlight.
That's great. Right, welcome everyone. So today's webinar is focusing on how to be financially resilient in the new year. So I know it's towards the end of the month, but it's about planning, looking forward to the new year, and how to avoid financial pressures during the more costly times of the year and understand the support available if anyone is suffering from financial worries that could potentially lead to debt difficulties. So, to enable us to start understanding this a bit better, being more in control, and all, we're joined today, and I'm very personally very excited by this, but we're joined today by Anthony Price, who I've known for quite a while, and he's the partnership manager from PayPlan, which is one of the UK's leading free debt advice providers. Now, Anthony has extensive experience in the debt sector and professional qualifications in money advice, insolvency certification. So he's actually perfectly placed to help all of us gain some insight and increase understanding of what it means to be financially resilient and tips on how to build the resilience. One is understanding, but it's like, how do you do that once you have the understanding around us? Um, with that, I've also got Jake from CiC as well, who's going to just support with the any questions that any of you ask to make sure that we don't miss anything. And I'm Arva Valika. I'm the head of operations, and I'm going to host this and ask some insightful questions to Anthony. So thank you for joining us today, Anthony. It's a pleasure to host this, and thank you for agreeing to join us today.
Pleasure. Lovely to be here. Really, really pleased to be here on a January day as well. I think it's an important time of year, isn't it, for us to get together and talk about such things.
It is, it is. So just to make everyone aware as well, that if you have any questions, please don't feel shy in just putting them in the chat. And then Jake will intervene and say what the questions are so that it becomes more interactive. We want this to be a conversational style webinar and a session so that it benefits all of you as well. And right at the end, we will also have another space for Q&As as well. So I'm going to start it off by asking you, Anthony, what does it actually mean to be financially resilient? Because actually, many people think it is about having a lot of money and savings in your bank account, or actually earning a lot of money. So it would be great to get your insight into this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and the end bit there that you said really resonated just with me there, because you said, a lot of people think it's about having a big salary, earning a lot of money, and the reality is that things can change in everybody's life, and we need to know how to respond to that and how to prepare for that, and that's a big part of financial resilience, really. It's having the ability to respond to those types of changes that could occur,
Yes.
and they could happen at any time in our lives, and that's one of the reasons why we're here as a service as well, doing what we do, because that can happen to anyone in any circumstance, any earning level. We have things that go on around us. And so whether that's something like a certain life event, it could be bereavement, divorce, it could be family growth, thinking about a really positive change, but it comes with its challenges, and some of those things will tip the balance, and we need to think about how we can prepare for that. So it's about having the ability to withstand money pressures,
Yeah.
but also for me, it's also about knowledge of how to respond to that. So it's knowledge of where can I go for support? Do I have a network of people around me? So on a really friend and family level basis, but also then what about professional support that I can access? It's that classic, is it? Knowledge is power, and then we can put that into action. So it can mean different things to different people, but certainly it's about our ability to respond and how to deal with changes that could come up along the way.
Thank you, Anthony. That's really quite helpful. And so and I think this is the we all want to have money. We all want to be comfortable, but it goes a bit more than that. It's also about how do you manage that money? If you think about it, we hear so much, even just multi-millionaire celebrities who end up going bankrupt. So it's just interesting about financial resilience. So thank you for that. So leading on from that, what do you think are the main financial pressures that people might face this particular year from your experience and what you're seeing in the landscape, financial landscape?
Yeah, I think you can break these into two areas, can't you? There's going to be things that we can expect and things that could happen, things that we're planning for in terms of changes that could come up, and things that could come out from nowhere, and some things that could surprise us. But certainly there's going to be those seasonal events that we will know have costs associated to them, and whether that's thinking about schooling and people going back to school, and whether that's uniforms, and whether it's sending children off to university, that can be an expensive time of year for people. But also the school holiday periods, where we've got a block of time when we're trying to keep the children happy and entertained, and often we're thinking, what do I need to pay for to enable me to do that? So I think certainly those types of events through the year are going to be hurdles. And of course, those times of year, like we've just passed, Christmas and other events like birthdays, etc. But festive periods like that can put an enormous amount of pressure on people. It's something that's often in people's minds, and that's one of the reasons why it's so good to do this at this time of year, because we've got a whole year ahead to try to think about that and factor that in, and try to avoid some of the kind of pitfalls that we can fall into, all of us, because of pressures around us, whether that's pressures online, pressures on TV, pressures around us family wise. There's so many pressures.
So
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was also going to mention those kind of factors that, again, we won't be able to avoid it necessarily, but we'll have to really think about what will we need to do to respond. So I'm going to just bring one up: mortgage changes that will affect a lot of people on the call today. The we've got some figures on that. There's 1.8 million households that are going to be affected this year coming off a fixed rate mortgage, and 5 million households into 2026. So a lot of people that are going to have those anxieties, I can imagine, around those changes to come.
Yeah, and I think linked with that is also, now that you've mentioned mortgages, I know the session is not about mortgages, but with the stamp duty for first-time buyers as well. So, many people could have saved up money to be a first-time buyer, and now they're not in a position to have it all done by this quarter, and all, and then they're going to be hit with, now again, I have to save up more if, because the stamp duty is going to go even up for the first-time buyers. So considering all these different pressures that you've mentioned, whether they're linked with seasonality, festive, birthdays, and different life events, or the ones that we have to be prepared for, like mortgages and all, or anything that could come out of the budget, we just don't know. Is how does one avoid starting then this new year in debt? And how does one manage these financial pressures without the risk of falling into debt?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a challenging one. But there are definitely things that we can do. And I think for every household, and it's going to sound like a really, really simple one here, but it's around really understanding our finances. It's understanding what our household budget looks like, because if we don't have the knowledge of that, it's very hard to then respond. It's very difficult to plan, and it's also a real source of generating anxiety, because you don't have the level of control that you would like to have, perhaps. And for some people, this can seem like a bit of a daunting place to lead into, actually looking at your money. But I can absolutely say, from 20 years of experience in the debt advice sector that I work in, the majority of people that come to us for advice have never done this. They've never looked at their finances and put together a household budget. But when people have done that for the first time, you can hear a bit of a sigh of relief. You can hear some of those worries slipping away, and their shoulders starting to drift down a little bit, because they're feeling more comfortable. And that's because that level of knowledge is increased, and it gives them the ability to make change. And that's what this is all about, in my opinion. It's about having the ability to make those changes. So first of all, understanding your household budget. And again, for some people, they will never have done that, and they perhaps think, I don't know where to start, and that's understandable. So it's around really looking at ways to make a start on that. For some people, it'll be a blank piece of paper and pen and start making lists. But one thing I highly recommend is using some form of budget planner, because it will prompt you to think about those costs that you will have that could slip off the radar. So it's about raising that level of knowledge and awareness. Where is my money going to? And what's my starting point? Do I have some money in my back pocket at the end of each month? And that's a good place to be, but I need to boost it further to bring in some extra money, and it gives me some more resilience. Do I have a situation where I'm just breaking even and I need to make a change quite soon because I've not got any buffer? Or am I in a situation where there's more going out than what's coming in, and I need to make some more immediate changes and look at ways to boost my income, reduce my outgoings to make that work for me? So I think certainly budget is a key one. And also linked to that, understanding where I can maximize my income. And one of the things I talk a lot about is untapping your potential, knowing what's available to you and untapping that and unlocking that. One of the things I always recommend to people is looking at making sure they've looked at boosting their income through a benefit check. Current statistics show this financial year, 8.5 million households will miss out on benefits they're entitled to, and it equates to around 23 billion pounds worth of benefits. And quite often that's because people make assumptions. They may think, I'm not entitled because I work full time, or I'm not entitled because I don't have children, or I'm fit and healthy. And of course, that leads to this huge amount of benefits that don't go claimed every year. And that could be the difference of avoiding a debt problem, because you may be building in that additional layer of income and then making that change.
And that's quite helpful, because there's a couple of comments in the chat. And one person, I quite like how they just simplified it, but that's what it is. And that's about, someone has said, living within your means. And I think what you've done
Yeah.
is, how do you even know how to live within your means, isn't it? It comes
Yeah.
down to that. So it's quite a beautiful way of just how this person has said that in the most simplistic way. And then
Love
you've
it.
actually shown what that means. Another person has asked, is there a budget planner I can download? So, maybe it is, Anthony, where you can just share a link afterwards. We can drop it in the chat. But actually, on the pay plan website, there's a budget planner there as well that people can go to. Or, even if you go to our own, the Ellie platform, that's the digital well-being platform that you all should have access to, hopefully. If you go over there, there's the pay plan as an organization that's there, and you can go over there and go on their website through us as well. So there's different ways. But budget planners are really, really great way to start off with, which helps you do the calculations. And it's there. And there's another person who's mentioned, it can be really hard to save with high living expenses, but what is a sensible safety net to have saved to avoid getting into problematic debt?
Well, it's a magic question, that, because it depends on what you ideally want to avoid. I mean, I used to grow up and my parents would always say, always put away a third of your income. I think that's probably out of reach for a lot of people these days. But I think what we should work to is, if suddenly my income wasn't there, what would I ideally want aside to be able to cover my essential costs? Yes, that won't include going on holiday, socializing necessarily, because we'll have to pay it right back if we were suddenly in that kind of income shock level. But what would ideally want to have aside so I could carry on for? What would that look like? Would you like to have in your mind confidence that you could manage for 3 months? Would it be 6
Yeah.
months? And I think it's that what resonates with you and gives you comfort that really matters, because a lot of what we're talking about here as well with financial resilience is also linked to mental health and well-being, and the comfort it can bring if you do have that right level of resilience. So for me, it's around, what would I ideally want to be able to get through, and is that 3 months, is it 6 months? For me, I always like to think about at least the 3 month mark in my mind, if not 6, because again, if it's about, I'm suddenly need to find a new job, if it's something like that, or I'm out of work because of sickness or illness, that could be an unknown quantity. But it's just thinking ahead of what gives you that level of comfort.
And just to let you know, thank you for that. On the budget planner, somebody has mentioned that there's other links that people can go to with budget plans. There's also the Money Helper website. So there's quite a few that have gone through due diligence, have been checked as valid government-backed organizations, and all that people can go and get that access and help from regarding a budget calculator. I think the other thing I want to just expand on and just pick your brain a little bit, Anthony. I know we've spoken about this more offline, separately. Where you and I were having a conversation about avoid spending on credit, or then transferring to a 0% credit card. But then the big one is this whole thing about buy now, pay later.
Yes.
Which I think was the most interesting element for me. So can we just shift our focus a little bit? And that is linked with, obviously, to avoid starting the new year in debt, which was my question. But let's try and see about this buy now, pay later, and what is happening here.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and it's something, I mean, one of the reasons we started talking about it, wasn't it? Because we're seeing more and more of this, and we are seeing it slip into different forms of life and different ways that people are using that type of credit. So I guess, first of all, to explain what it is, because some people won't have that level of awareness. Buy now, pay later is a way, as it says on the tin, very simply, to purchase something now but pay for it later, and normally that will be in 3 months installments. So and normally comes with a bonus of being 0%, which sounds great, and it can be great in certain circumstances. So some people will see this around. You'll hear of Klarna and other buy now, pay later agreements and forms of credit. And often you'll see them when you're trying to buy perhaps, in an ideal world, they'll be there to help you if you suddenly had a fridge breakdown or a white good kind of
Yeah, it's like those
situation.
big ticket items,
That's
isn't
it.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which I perhaps can't do without. I need them relatively quickly. You know, if your fridge freezer breaks down, you need to get that resolved. But maybe the money's not there. And this is built into the financial resilience part as well, isn't it? So it allows you to buy that, but then break it into 3 payments and spread it across that period of time to make it more manageable. 3 paydays, great. That sounds very good. The difficult bit is, well, there's several areas. First of all, what we're seeing is that some people are using it in multiple forms. So not just taking out one in 1 month, but multiple buy now, pay laters in 1 month. So some people that are coming to us for debt support and debt advice, we see them having dozens of buy now, pay later agreements that they've been trying to manage and juggle. And that becomes a problem quite quickly
And what
because
is it around? What are these buy now, pay later that people are using that facility for?
yeah, very interesting because again, we're seeing a big shift in that. So, you know, yes, some people are using it for those white goods, but also it could be things like TV, it could be, you know, a games console. A lot of people use it around Christmas and birthdays, but it could be for all sorts of things. But it could be to other extremes. So if I was to say to you, we're now seeing people that have come to us and have said, I've used buy now, pay later to buy a Chinese takeaway meal and spread it over 3 months, you can see how that's very quickly going into a different territory. And it can become quite dangerous because if you're having to spread a Chinese takeaway meal over 3 months, it should be really an alarm bell to think that my financial resilience and financial well-being isn't quite where it needs to be. So we're seeing a real shift at the moment. It's quite concerning, really.
Thank you for that, Anthony. We've got a question come in saying, do you think that buy now, pay later schemes have made accruing debt easier as they don't feel like traditional forms of credit and feel easier or more instant to access?
I would say absolutely, and some of that is because of the way it's advertised. I know, you know, when I buy things online, often the first thing you're presented with is buy now, pay later. It's not, would you like to pay this off in full? Do you want to pay, you know, and that's the same if you go into a department store or, you know, the likes of in person. Often there'll be a sign on the actual counter that will say pay in Klarna. It's very, very much there and saying this is your ideal choice. I think that's the key thing with a lot of the messages that are coming out now. So I think it is easier. I think it is absolutely, you know, for a lot of people it sounds ideal. And in some circumstances it can be, you know, it's not to say it's not a good financial product in the right context. But
Yeah.
again, because it's often presented to you in that moment, it's often very in the impulse moment. It's a okay, I can just quickly click that done and then think about it later. And so it doesn't really give you that cool off moment to think, is that the right choice for me? So I would
So
absolutely agree.
it's
It has
about
made it easier.
how it's easy, isn't it? And just simple without thinking. It's the same
Yeah.
concept of, you know, when you have to spend using cash versus a card. You know, there's this whole psychology behind it, isn't it? Where
It is.
it's harder to spend cash, giving £50 in cash for a meal is very different when you have to count the £10 notes 5 times
Absolutely.
versus just tapping your card. Now you don't even have to put a pin, you just tap it. So,
Tap
you
it.
know, it's becoming easier and easier. I think what I'm curious about is that, and this leads on quite nicely to the next question, but with the whole buy now, pay later, what my view is not it's not my view, what my observation also is that people, yes, could be using it because it's easier. So
Yep.
takeaways or small ticket items where, you know, they should be able to afford it because of the way they're earning and all, but it's people's behaviors are changing and priorities. So what my worry is that we're moving into a landscape where people are like, well, you know what, I can have the next couple of takeaways and buy now, pay later, but I need to buy the new, I don't know, gadget instead. So I think it's that. So one is the how easy it is to use the buy now, pay later, and then your financial resilience keeps getting hit. But it's
Absolutely.
because they're getting distracted by other noise that they're getting pulled into to buy and spend. And that's where the worry keeps happening, because if the spending keeps increasing, you still have to pay the money off.
Absolutely. And I think that word you've just used there, noise, it's everywhere. And it's one of those noises, it's almost like it's silent but deadly. It's everywhere. And especially, and when I refer to that, in my mind, I'm thinking a lot around social media, but others as well. There's a lot of, when we speak to people that come to us for help, and we really start to understand why people have built up debt, and really what's been the main factor in that. A lot of it's just general living, but also it's people who are just trying to live up to standards. They're trying to live up to live up with the Joneses. And I mean, we've talked about this before, haven't we, with regards to the kind of Instagram lifestyle kind of, and how that's just becoming such a big thing, and how certain people are just feeling that they've got to live up to that. And it's the same old situation, isn't it? We always put our best versions of life online. No one's ever going to put the poor parts of life, things when it goes wrong, or you might see a flash of that, but it's not really how people promote their life. And it's people who are flashing the new watch and the new gadget, as you mentioned earlier, or the luxury holiday, or the beautiful piece of clothing that they've had, and then everybody feeling they've got to live up to that and also achieve that, but without the resources to be able to do it, without credit. So I think a lot of that, trying to get the mod cons, there's always the new phone that's out every year, and it's got the new little thing on it that everybody wants. And a lot of the problem with the way that things are promoted like that these days, it's that immediate impulse. It's you can soon feed into that. So I think people's behaviors are absolutely changing, and a lot of that's to do with the way that we access information these days.
Yeah, and I think social media is an interesting one, Anthony, isn't it? That it does impact the way we spend money. I mean, Instagram is a great one. If you look at it, that especially if you talk about eating habits and food places to visit, not eating habits, what I meant is the food places to visit and where to eat. It could be, quite an expensive place, but people don't even check necessarily how much out of pocket there will be, what week of the month it is. So, if it's a 5-week month, you need to think carefully about your spending versus maybe a 4-week month. That's just a random example. But if there's a lot happening on Instagram and your news feeds about this is the restaurant to be at, and all your friends are putting pictures over there, and how lovely the pictures look, and beautiful pictures of the photographs of the food, you are tempted to go. So it's interesting, isn't it, that social media is changing the way we spend money, or the focus of where the money spending should be. I think that's more the concern I have.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think people see those and they don't necessarily think, oh, well, actually that's an advertisement, or that's a sponsored event. Or if someone's in a lovely restaurant and it's someone, public figure, there's probably zero chance they've paid for that. They've been funded to do that. And again, it just drives this anxiety. And I think that people thinking, oh, I need to have that, I need to be in the same position. And a lot of people now, we're living our lives out online and in public.
You are. We all
pressure.
are. Exactly. So, what changes? Actually, there's somebody who's mentioned something here. Do you feel that companies which offer items on finance offer the same problem and accrues debt? That is, big items that are spread over 24 or 48 months don't seem like big payments per month, but actually will now be consistent payments in your life for the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's a really good point. This has been around. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, it was always, paying 48 months. And, that I think the thing with it is, am I doing that because it resolves a problem? I mean, we've talked about sometimes there's an immediate need. Okay, that's one thing. But also then the other side of it is, am I going to get stuck into a trap where I'm then get to that end of 4 years and I then renew it and I'm buying the next thing and it's the same, it's to replace the old one, but it's because of a want rather than a need. And I think that's the difference with these. Is it a need, is it a want? And that to go into, to mention one of the words, that's been mentioned, that just consistency, and is it just a cycle? Am I just going to be for decades to come getting that 4-year agreement and then getting another 4-year, 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 and it becomes just the norm? I think there's a big question mark, isn't it? I think we should all step back sometimes when we're buying and going, is it a need, is it a want? And there's nothing wrong with buying things that are a want. It is, as long as we understand the impact level and we understand what that can do for us, both positively and negatively.
Thank you for that. So from that, what changes then have you noticed in people's behaviors where money is concerned, especially about spending habits? So this could be between different genders or different age groups, generations.
Yeah.
That would really be helpful for all of us to hear that and understand it.
Yeah. I think genders is always an interesting one. I think things have changed, of course, and don't want to, it could become quite stereotypical in some ways, I guess, the way that this could be answered. But I think, again, the way that people access money, credit, the kind of things that are promoted to them, whether it's I think a great one I could talk about, actually, thinking about the beauty industry for a moment, I think that's really changed for men over the last few decades, and the last decade in particular, and even the last 5 years. It's really ramped up in terms of what men are accessing, and therefore what's being offered to them online or in different ways. So whether it's things like hair loss treatment, whether it's beauty products for face, whether it's aesthetics, whatever it might be, I think that a lot's changed, and then suddenly we see a real acceleration point. So I think the way that people access information, what's been presented to them's changed. So the other thing that I have seen is a real change in age groups. In fact, within our service, we've seen a lot of that change as well, Arva. So around different generations, that's really shifting at the moment. In particular, Gen Z, which is, I guess, very topical with what we're talking about here. If you think about Gen Z being 1997 to 2012 as years been born, so that takes you up to about 27. We've seen nearly a 2% increase in that age group coming to us, which sounds small, but actually when you look at it on a numbers level, that's quite a shift. And that presents very different demographics to us and ways that we have to support that age group as well.
That's quite interesting. And do you see from your own experience and all that it is men who have reached out more or women who have reached out more or for debt? And I'm just using the stereotypical right now for the men, women, for stats and all.
Yeah.
That what was been your experience, and also the amount of debt, so problematic debt or manageable debt that people are contacting. I'm just curious about this.
Really. The think about split, if we just take male female at the moment and just think about that, really interesting one. When I first started in this world of debt advice and money, we always used to see a huge percentage of women coming to us. It far outweighed men every single week if we were looking at that, and that was probably for different reasons in terms of the way that they interact with services, in terms of confidence, for some, and it might be that they had more oversight of money. Lots of different factors that we could pull into. But what's been interesting over the last 5 years is that we've seen that change completely. We are nearly at a point where it's 50-50. We're still slightly more female based in terms of people coming to us, so it's about 51, nearly 52%, but we're nearly down the middle, and I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of things that we've seen shifting. If we think about the shift of men coming forward and talking more about mental health, that has to be part of this, because when something becomes more acceptable in one area, it absolutely has a ripple effect in others. So I think we will continue to see that shift and that split, becoming quite interesting. So certainly male and female, the clients that come to us, we're seeing that far more down the middle now. And then in terms of other changes that we've seen, we are seeing changes with earning levels as well. I'll just touch on
Okay.
that because I think that's another
Right.
factor. For the first time, so this, if we look back over the last 18 months, really since the cost of living crisis has started to change, we have seen for the first time in 12 years an increase in high-end earners coming to us for debt and money worries and
And
support around that.
what's your definition
So
of the high-end
of that,
earners?
yeah, so households of over £60,000 of income, we would fall into that
Okay.
category for our definition.
Right.
And I think that really does show that everyone's being impacted at different levels, but sometimes there is a mindset of, oh, it's this particular demographic of people that struggle with money, and it's absolutely not. You know, it's everyone and in different ways, but that's an interesting shift that we've seen there.
God, that is. I wasn't fully aware of that, so that's quite interesting. And if we spoke a little bit about debt,
Yes.
some people think that they're managing their debt okay, and all, and they're quite structured and all, but some people don't. But actually, some of us might not even understand what is debt, the different types of debt that exist. Um, so I do have an understanding that there's priority debt and non-priority debt, secured, unsecured, and all. But I think it would be really good for people to understand what are the different types of debt that someone might
Yeah.
have, especially about the priority and non-priority, because it can be
Yeah.
quite overwhelming if somebody goes through a financial crisis or difficulties and suddenly they're getting bombarded with reminder letters, but they don't know what it actually means, what's more important than the other, and how to even go about
Yeah.
paying some of these off.
Yeah, really, really good points. Let's break that down then into a few different
Sure.
areas because I think there's some real important factors in there. One of the things I think that you were asking there, absolutely, and one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what's the difference between debt but just being, am I just overspending? That's a good starting point. And I guess, one way to really simplify that is having debt means I owe money to someone. Spending too much means I've probably just not got a good oversight of where my expenses are going and
Yeah.
how I'm managing my money. And that doesn't mean that I owe money to people, I'm in debt, but it might mean I still want to focus on that and deal with that. I mean, in the simplest form, debt means I owe money to people. But what we could then do is break that down into manageable debt and unmanageable debt for a starter. A lot of people misinterpret what debt means because they often think, oh, I have debt means I'm behind with my payments. People are chasing me for money. I'm in arrears, all of these different things. But debt doesn't mean that. It just means I owe money. And we all have
Mhm.
debt during our lifetime. I've got a debt because I owe a mortgage. It's
Yeah.
money I owe to a bank, and I wouldn't have been able to buy that house without it. But there is a difference then between can I pay that each month or is that becoming problematic and I'm struggling and it's becoming unmanageable debt? And being able to recognize that really matters. And then talking about the types of debt, there are, yeah, absolutely lots of types of debt here. So if we think about priority debt and unpriority debt, priority debt would be types of debt that would have more severe consequences if I'm not paying them on time or not paying them at all. So that would be things like secured borrowing. That could be a mortgage. It could be secured lending on a vehicle, like a hire purchase. It could be rent, if we think about that, because if I don't pay my rent, the consequence of that could be I could become homeless. It could be something like council tax
Yeah.
because of the legalities around that and what can happen if you don't pay council tax, or TV license, another example.
Which many
Some
people are not aware that TV license is a priority debt, isn't it?
absolutely priority debt. Actually, one of the debts that could see you go to jail if you don't pay it. It's a real severe consequence for that one. So absolutely, or a hefty fine. So those are the types of things that absolutely need to be prioritized above other types of debts. So if you think about non-priority debt, that would be such things like credit cards. It could be an unsecured bank loan that could you've taken out to pay for anything. It could be things like an overdraft. It could be a buy now, pay later. We've talked about that already. It could be a debt such as a catalogue debt, or it could be a card that I'm using for one of the big department stores. So it's that type of what we call unsecured debt, but debt that doesn't have as much of a consequence if I'm not dealing with that. It needs to be dealt with. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be looked at, but there are certain debts that you would think I need to prioritize this one above the other. And actually, at the moment, if we look at people coming to us with debt worries and concerns, around 45% of clients come to us with both non-priority debt and priority debts as well. And the average person comes to us with at least around 7 different debts that they need support with.
Oh, wow.
So this is why it becomes quite complicated, because it's never just often one thing that someone is managing in their life when it comes to debt and borrowing.
Yeah.
There will be multiple things, and sometimes it is hard to think, well, what comes first? And I will say one thing that I always talk about in sessions and training that I deliver: often people pay those that shout the loudest.
Yeah, it's the one
And
with the red fonts and the big
Yeah.
stamps on it, shouting it out and
Absolutely.
and things like that. Yes.
Yeah, and I look at those types of letters that people often can receive and will call us about really, really worried. And often there's some keywords in there that people overlook, and it will say, this is what could happen. We could do this. We may do this. And often it's those threats, but people will read those as absolutes. This is going to happen to me. Whereas, for priority debts, often they won't come as harshly or as quickly as that in terms of messages, because they know they can get the money back through other means. So it's really important to understand the types of debts you have. It's often one of the things that we give a lot of guidance to and education around as well when people come to us, because they perhaps have fallen behind with rent and really they need to prioritize that. And it might be other forms of debt that need to be dealt with in a different way. So absolutely.
Yeah. And that's very helpful. Thank you for that. There's a few questions and all.
Great.
I'll just get to it in a minute. And I think I just want to just emphasize a little bit about debt. That a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, without spending too much time on it, so I want to just get to the questions, is people think by getting debt advice from an organization, like whether that be PayPlan, whether that be another organization similar to yourself, that it'll affect their credit score. Or their credit score will go at risk, or put things like their home at risk. Actually, seeking the debt advice doesn't put anything at risk. What it does is it actually brings you that peace of mind that you've gone to the right place as a starting point, and then they will guide you and handhold you through that process on what are your options based on your circumstances at that point. So I think that's from just my side, is just to be aware of that. And that, if you're sharing information, that your family or your partners aren't going to get impacted, because this is Anthony, am I correct that, this is about you having the conversations with the person contacting you and explaining their situation to you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think credit rating, credit scores, we hear so much about it, but it often then becomes a big factor for people. And it's absolutely true that often people, when they come through to get help, it'll be one of the top questions that they've got. What's the impact of me doing this? But what's sometimes more worrying is that people don't come and ask that question, and they're put off and they don't actually come forward and get help at all. And just to echo your points there, because they're so important, and I just want to say, again, people can come and get the right level of advice, take away the facts, take away, importantly, the pros and the cons, and make an informed decision. Whether, depending on what those next steps are, there may be impacts of that, but you will be fully informed of what those impact levels are, so you can judge appropriately which one is right for me. But getting the advice, no impact to credit score from just getting advice, completely confidential. Nobody will know that you've done that. I think one of the key things we often get asked is, will my employer find out if I get this advice? The second one is, do I need to tell my partner? There may be some really good reasons to tell your partner, because they could support. But to get the advice, they're not things you've got to do. everything's in confidence. It's up to you what you choose to do with that
Thank
information and
you.
how you decide to proceed.
Thank you for that. And I'll just come to one of the questions put there, which is similar to the one that I had actually. And it says, can we get your top 3 hacks for reducing our costs? Ones that might be less known or thought about. And, this is about one of the questions I wanted to ask is what tips can you give us and what should people really be aware of, which can then feed into the financial resilience or reducing costs like the question asked.
Yeah. Oh, great. I love this. I mean, one of the things I'm going to loop back. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I've talked about it at length already. But certainly your budget would be, for me, top tip number 1. Because if you don't understand what your household finances look like and go through that budgeting exercise, you really don't know then how to make the difference, where your money's going to. I always think about finances as like a bit of a bucket. Have you got a solid bucket and it's holding everything in, or have you got a leaky bucket and you've got costs going out all over the place and it's really hard to, you haven't got enough fingers to plug those gaps.
Yeah.
So thinking of it on that level, but also doing a household budget on a regular basis is so important because things are changing at quite a pace at the moment. So having that level of knowledge as a starting point. In terms of reducing costs, lots of things you could do. I mean, I often say to people, are you, in terms of when it might be people's borrowing, if you have got borrowing, one thing you talked about and touched on earlier was 0% credit cards. Am I paying unnecessarily for interest? Is there a better way to shift that? And can I save money and free up money to save, to enable me to do that? And one of the things I often say to people to do to just suss that out is use credit reporting facilities. There are some great apps out there like ClearScore, Credit Karma that will give you guidance on where you can get more appropriate and better financial products. So use those kind of facilities available. The other thing as well, and this is going to sound really simple, but do make sure that you're shopping around for the best product when it comes to insurances.
You were going to say that,
Yeah.
Anthony. I knew that would be the next bit. Because for me, that is so critical. The problem is that organizations and companies have made it so easy to join, but so difficult to leave, that for our own sanity, we're like, oh, can't be bothered. I'm just going to stay here for this additional £10 a month. I can't be bothered with the stress. But actually, that £10 a month can help you with something else, or £20, £30, £100. Whatever. I mean, my personal example is for my cable provider and my Wi-Fi provider. Obviously, I'm not going to take names and all, but I was with them for many years. But I just said I didn't think twice before leaving them. I had to do a lot of shopping around, spent quite a good few hours, but I'm quite comfortable making the call. And I said, I don't want to get into conversations unless you give me a discount to match this or be better. Otherwise, I'm leaving. And that's it. So I actually felt quite comfortable. And then you can start seeing that if you do these on 2 or 3 items a month, that's where you start feeling that difference.
Absolutely. It's the multiples that count. Most of us will have multiple insurances, not just one. If we're thinking about someone, if I look at my household, I've got home insurance, car insurance, pet insurance, life insurance. There's 4 just straight away. And, you're right. Someone thinks, oh, I can save £10 on there. Is it worth me doing it? But if you spread that across multiple products, that's a lot of money. And I would rather have that in my back pocket. And to be honest, it's often a lot more than £10 a month. You've just mentioned your example. My example was with my home buildings and contents insurance this year. And I've been paying £52 a month, and suddenly the renewals come through and they want £95 a month from me. And there's absolutely no way I'm going to allow that to happen. And so I got straight onto the comparison websites, looked at the options available to me, checked the few companies that don't appear on comparison websites as well. And lo and behold, I've been able to shift to a product that's now costing me, again, it's less than £60.
I think you're absolutely right. I had to do something similar for my pet insurance. So any of the pet lovers over here, I actually ended up getting pet insurance linked with the same organization that does my car insurance. But on the face of it, when you just do a search, you think X, Y, and Z company was turning out the cheapest. But actually, when I linked it with my insurance provider, it drastically was even cheaper. But in its own right, it isn't cheap. So I think we just have to be a bit more savvy and just invest that little bit of time for which we can reap the financial benefits. Because I think I'm saving around, it's around a good 35, 40 pounds a month.
Yeah,
By
it's a lot of money
linking
these
it with
days.
my car insurance provider.
Yeah, those multi-policy kind of agreements, really, really important. And some people, you mentioned earlier, some people will have anxieties around, will it be complicated? Will they make it difficult for me? One of the tricks that I've found that works for me, and I did it this time round, my current provider that I was with, when I was looking at switching, they said you need to call us to cancel. So I couldn't do that online. I couldn't do it in an email. I couldn't opt out. I had to call them. I mean, that's frustrating anyway, number one, especially when I bought it online, I should be expected to cancel it online. But what I did was I made sure I had my policy with my new provider done. And I went in, I said, I want to cancel this because I've got a renewal with someone else. There isn't room for discussion because I've already got the new product. So there's no point in them saying to me, let's see what I can do to keep you. It's done. So sometimes go in with that kind of attitude, and you steered the conversation. The other little point I will say, and these are just little small hacks as well, just check out what you could get for free. So for example, if you use some of the comparison websites, and I'll just use one because it's well known, comparethemarket.com, use them and you'll get your year free of the Meerkat rewards. That's 2 for 1 at the cinema. It's discount when you go out and eat. It's discount at one of the baristas. These things add up. But also the big hack I often have, and it sounds so simple, but check your bank account to see what they give you for free. I checked my bank account recently. I do it on a regular basis. Appreciate, financial geek. I don't mind being called that. I do these things, but you've got to be on it. But one of the things I did was I checked my bank account recently, and lo and behold, they said, as a loyal customer of ours, would you like Apple TV for free? No expiry on that, just rolling. So a lot of them will say, would you like Apple TV or whatever it is for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then that's it. But this was an open-ended, do you want Apple TV? Yes, please, because I was paying for that anyway. So cancel the paid version. I'll have that version for free. Brilliant. That's another £10 saved per month for me. And these things that just add up over time. So
Yeah.
just check those things out. It makes a big difference.
Thank you for that. There's a couple of more questions which we might not be able to get to, but I just wanted to just mention that we'll try and put it in the answer in the chat, or address them in another way. Some of the questions are more coming into the regulated sector, which are the best savings accounts to have and all. Now, the plan is that we will run hopefully a financial webinar on savings this year as well, where tips and advice can be given. But anyone who needs some guidance on money or financial guidance, is best to call up the Money Helper and get some help on savings, investments, and all, because they'll be able to guide you. But there's one question which I can just see, which is where the person has said, I'm currently studying and I'm worried about student loan debt when I have to pay it back, as the total amount increases monthly due to interest. Do you know if the minimum amount I have to pay every month increase as well?
So with that, I mean, I would always say, come and get some regulated debt advice with that, because it falls into the same pot. It is a different debt. It's ring fenced because of the type of debt it is. But this is exactly the kind of thing that you can get some advice on, and to make sure that you can then use that information to make decisions on, well, again, what do I do with that debt versus other debts? What's important to me? So I would absolutely say, come and get some debt advice, because it's important that what we give you is for you independently. So absolutely, come and get it.
Thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, because I want to just leave the last few minutes for any additional questions and all, where we'll stop the recording towards that bit. But I think what I want to just round this up to, Anthony, is that of course you've spoken a lot about financial resilience, and people have been interested in the different tips, and also thank you for that. I think the one thing that I would just want to say from my side, especially working for CiC and all, is not to forget the relationship between financial and mental well-being. Obviously, we've not had an opportunity to go into it much, but both financial and mental well-being are equally significant, and each impacts the other. Now, financial well-being can impact your mental well-being because you are in that state of constant stress and anxiety, and also the reverse way as well, that if your mental health is poor, then you could make poor financial decisions or not make the decisions, where you don't open up maybe bills that are coming there without realizing. And also, one needs to be aware of the life event one is going through to be prepared for any impact they see as a result of that event. For example, even a positive one like birth of a child could be positive, but if there are some health issues attached with it or lack of sleep, sleep deprivation, you don't know how that can then start impacting your mental well-being, which then impacts your financial well-being as well. Sometimes we don't know what element to get support from. Do I need to get financial support, financial well-being support? So do I need to call up Anthony at Payplan? Or do I need to call up to get some counseling support to improve my mental health because I can't sleep at night? And it's quite overwhelming. It is quite stressful where people, all of us can feel so overwhelmed that we can't make a decision on what help to get first. And I just really want to emphasize that that's where the employee assistance program, that's where we can come in. That if you are genuinely in that state of mind where you can't make that decision, and because it can be quite daunting because you're not feeling well, call us and speak to us, because we will help navigate that initial conversation with you to try and strip it away for you to understand really what the impact of whatever life event you're going through is having on your financial well-being, but also on your mental health. A classic one I always have said is about the divorce separation. You might be having sleepless nights. It's quite stressful and all, but you might not have thought about what about the financial implications of this. That's where we can come in and support. So I just want to make sure that these challenges, you are not alone. All of us have gone through some kind of life events where the impact is there. So it's about encouraging all of you to reach out and really get the support, because you're not alone and you're not going to be judged. And all. So what we'll do now is ask. So thank you for that. And thank you for attending this session as well. There are going to be a series of other webinars linked with financial well-being. Anthony is going to be reinvited to a few of them. We're going to have other guest speakers coming in for different topics that we're choosing as well. Please send your recommendations in. But are there any other questions that people would specifically like to ask that we might not have focused on in the last couple of minutes?
Hi, Arva. Yes, there are a few that have just been coming through recently. And the first one I picked out was, is there any specific tips you would have for young people starting their financial journey? Cost of living has hit us really hard.
Of that. I mean, there's a few. I would say, for me, I would say have those conversations early, but have them openly in the household. One of the reasons I think I've ended up in the job I do is because I used to have those very open conversations about money in the household, good and bad. I think that's really important because, I know the way I budget is because I watch my mum budget, and the way she used to have envelopes and she would have written on their car costs, shopping money, and there's good reasons to avoid that these days because of cash and the risk of that, but the principle of that was because I was absorbing that information, and I've now adopted that myself, but in different ways. But also there's some great resources on the link that I sent through earlier, which is the financial wellbeing resources, and there'll be lots of others out there to look at as well, but just to mention them, there are two on there, and one is how to have conversations around money with youngsters, but also then there's one on there for students. That's a key time as well to really be thinking about what will be opening up to them. So I think have those conversations early, have them openly, but then use resources as well. There's three that I would mention.
And thank you for that. And the plan is that hopefully at some point this year we will be having or trying to organize a financial well-being awareness session for parents or families where they've got children. So it's going to be linked predominantly for children. And also that is to look out for that. So hopefully that will be coming this year as well.
That's great.
Jake,
Thank you,
are there any
Anthony.
other questions there, Jake?
No, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Arva. There is one more, but before I do get to that question, just like to reiterate the thank yous that are flying in the chat from all the participants. So you've had a really productive session. The final question, to my knowledge, that is left from the chat: what choices are there if credit rating stops you accessing 0% credit cards to pay those lower debts?
I mean, I guess one thing would be, if you're at the end of your borrowing ability, that's probably an indicator that you need to get some support. That would be my key number one, because are you looking for that to try and deal with debt you've already got and you're trying to shift, and if you can't do that, come and get some debt advice would be number one. But also, do use those credit report facilities that I talked about earlier, those different apps that you can download. First of all, will give you all of the guidance around what you're doing well in and how to keep building credit scores, but also what you need to focus on as a central point for you personally, and how to start edging that back up. And then also on there are things that you can look at in terms of what's available to me in terms of borrowing, who's more likely to say yes to me if I need to borrow as well. So you're making the right decisions and you're not doing more damage to your credit score by going and applying to the wrong people. So again, this whole, someone put it on the chat earlier, knowledge really is power. So using those resources helps you to make those decisions as well. But if you are thinking, I'm at that limit, I've got debt and I just don't know where to turn anymore, that's probably a very good indicator you need to get some debt advice.
Thank you. And we've come to the end of our session. Anthony and myself and Jake will just remain here for a few more minutes while we see everyone log out. But thank you so much all for your time. And thank you, Anthony. It's been wonderful.
Sure. Been lovely to join you.
Anthony and Jake, what we can do is we can also log out. And is it okay if I just send you an invite just for a pop-up?
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Of course. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.